Introduction of Scott that I'm going to read, but honestly, I know for myself, all I have to do is close my eyes and listen to that voice, and I know exactly who it is that's speaking. Scott is one of the country's most admired, both sportscaster and writer. He's the host of the weekend Saturday edition on NPR and also their morning news broadcast Up First. He's reported from every state in the country and 5 continents, 10 different wars. He's done it all. So I want to not take any more time away from Scott, and I'll turn it over to him. Again, everybody just enjoy that lovely voice. Go ahead,
Well,
Scott.
thank you, Denise. I actually wish I had a lovely voice. I don't have a lovely voice. It's kind of scratchy. It's a little high pitched. It's not a very good voice. I mean, the one I think people infer that it's nice because it's what I do for a living, and let me tell you, if I could never make butter commercials with this voice, I could never make any compelling. I don't have a particularly good voice. I'm trying to think if I have any talents at all. I would ask our daughters, but I think their answer would be absolutely not, because they don't count dad jokes about it. Look, it's very good to talk to you. You are neighbors. I mean, we're just a few blocks away from each other, and wish this could be in person, but I don't have to tell you, these are the times in which we're living. So I'm very glad to join you. And I just say our daughters, from the time they came into our lives, as many of you may know, both of our daughters were born in China and were a year old or younger when they came into our lives, and they have spent all but that first year, those lives in our neighborhood. And I want to thank you for making that neighborhood so nice and welcoming for them. I know we've met a lot of you one way or another in various capacities over the years, and in Foggy Bottom and West End. And thank you for helping to give our daughters such wonderful lives. We're very grateful. Look, I don't have to tell you, I'm just going to have a few remarks at the top, and then we'll get to questions. We have just been through an ugly and dispiriting period. I don't mind in many ways saying shameful. That attack on the US Capitol was frightening and appalling, and is one of those occasions that kind of makes you reassess where we stand in this country. As Denise mentioned, I've covered a lot of conflicts overseas, and always had this kind of American confidence that while we sail the world in a sea of troubles, this American ship of state will find the right route. And it's been extraordinarily vexing in this past year to have discovered that among the great diversities we have in America is also an appalling disparity. We've developed a vaccine in record time, but we couldn't use humbler technologies and often basic good sense to prevent hundreds of thousands of deaths from COVID-19. We have some of the most accomplished and sophisticated medical care in the world. And yet, as I suspect I don't have to tell you, millions of people are locked off from basic health care and good health from economic circumstance, regional circumstance. We have a durable and renewing democracy that in a time of a spreading epidemic, scores of millions of Americans were able to vote safely and votes were counted accurately. But we had that deliberative system in Congress that couldn't agree, really still hasn't, on necessary economic relief to assist millions of Americans. And we just, America's can-do record and can-do spirit, I think, has been tested and shaken. Part of the problem I think we have in this country, as I don't have to tell you, is that people can now choose the news they want. They don't have to disturb themselves with a story or a fact or opinion that will upset their view of the world. People who believe the moon landing was a hoax can now go online and find videos that purport to support that preposterous view. People who believe the attacks of September 11th were a fraud can find support for this kind of slander. And instead of thinking themselves as a group of lunatics, they think of themselves as a community. There are online forums where people can tell themselves that they're aggrieved victims and not loveless losers. Millions of good and conscientious Americans now find themselves filled with news and nonsense they choose that just nourishes the views they already hold. People sometimes congratulate public figures on, commentators or even comedians for speaking truth to power. But I think, in fact, more and more Americans from all political corners are just speaking to themselves in tweet after tweet, post after post, just talking to themselves. And I think that's not healthy, whether you're talking to people who share your opinion on Twitter all the time or just talking to yourself on the subway, just echoing your own opinions and hearing them echoed back at you. We have this most dazzling power of the internet to connect us to the world. And in many ways, we've used it to close ourselves off from different points of view. Too often we've used this dazzling information technology not to inform ourselves, but to misinform ourselves and just confirm whatever we'd like to believe. And I don't mind telling you, it depresses me sometimes that after so many decades in which good journalists have strived to bring a variety of opinions and experiences to people, so many Americans now choose to close their ears and their hearts and their minds. Real journalism doesn't just pat your audience on the head and say, you're right. You're smarter than everybody else, and everything you think is right, and we're going to help you keep thinking that way. Often it's having the nerve and the respect and the professionalism to tell an audience, this story may reflect views that you don't share. That's what we're here to do. I think every now and then we should remember there is no safe place in journalism. And it depresses me that so many people are living in silos. I saw a lot of this in the 1990s when I covered the war in Bosnia and the siege of Sarajevo. There you had a multi-religious, multi-ethnic society, but they began to get divided into different information silos. As an inexact illustration of this, I'm going to talk about vaccine registration. I think we're all familiar with that. It's absolutely necessary. I think it's absolutely necessary for people we know who are most vulnerable. As I don't have to tell you, many senior citizens have served their country, raised families, helped build their communities. There is universal agreement senior citizens should be among the first people to receive a coronavirus vaccine. And how do they go about doing that? By devising a registration system that is in so many ways lost on people in that age group. Reports have come in from all over the country from various websites that they might be intuitive to the people who designed them, but they're daunting and frustrating and ultimately often quite useless. New York City, for example, has created what they call an aggregated information site. And I suppose they call it aggregated because calling it an information site doesn't make it seem important enough, in which people have to answer 51 questions before they can register. I happened to talk to a couple of people in New York who consider that a kind of harassment. And I don't have to tell you, telling people, oh, you've got to clear your browser's cookies is a little bit like giving them an instruction in Klingon. It sounds more like pantry advice than something to do with computers. And I don't have to tell you, many senior citizens are quite literate with computer technology. They tweet and shop for food, they Zoom with their families, they refill prescriptions, they follow the news. But, during these past few weeks, I have been reminded of when my mother reached her 80s, and my wife and I would take her to the Apple store on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And one of the young people wearing a Genius t-shirt or a sweatshirt would begin to talk to my wife and I, not my mother. And it reminded me of when my mother would bring me into a shoe store when I was like 3 or 4, and the salesperson would talk to her and wouldn't talk to me. It was demeaning to my mother, and of course she noticed it. Our 17-year-old, by the way, assists seniors who happen to live in our building with some of their technology. And it touches me deeply that she knows they are often very accomplished people who speak more than one language, have been around the world, read widely, know about art and science. They have wisdom and hearts that are ripe with love, and they enrich the world. But the system of registration is just something that is difficult for them to participate in. And we also know this reflects a deeper problem about the distribution of equality in our society, because people who don't have resources are less likely to have computer access, including a smartphone or reliable internet access, especially for a process that takes hours. Just as there are some of the same families who've lost children who can't participate in remote learning, and may be lost to schools thereafter. One thing that is on my mind, and I will close with this, I think, and then we'll begin to take your questions. I have really had my mind refreshed, and you might as you walk around this neighborhood we share, by what we now consider to be essential workers. I mean, certainly nurses and doctors and paramedics and technicians who have in so many ways risked their lives for others. But there are people who have often been overlooked in daily life, who have kept our lives going, who are essential. My wife and I often take runs in the morning in the fog, as we call it, Foggy Bottom West End neighborhood. It's early in the morning, and there's not much of anybody out. But you know who you do see out? Essential people, bus and taxi drivers, a lot of whom have taken hospital workers to their 14-hour shifts. You see people unloading stock and cashiers who work in stores, so we can still buy food and milk and bread and coffee. You see truck drivers steering rigs with pictures of fruits and vegetables on the side, and you see long trucks pulled up at the pharmacies to bring medicines and soap and candy, and delivery service vans, drivers now balancing boxes in their arms. You see bakers and cooks behind glass windows, and rolling out pizza dough and slicing sandwiches and stirring soups to be picked up or delivered to people who've been stuck inside. And I feel anxious and edgy and hungry. And security guards on patrol in front of office buildings and theaters, and maintenance workers in dark green and gray and blue uniforms, often with their names, sewn over their hearts, and masks and gloves, ready to unplug toilets and unstick elevators. And sanitation workers in dark blue uniforms rolling out those trash bins to lift them in the back of trash trucks. And people who work in convenience stores, and yes, the liquor store that's downstairs here, and police officers on the street, and construction workers in boots and masks and gloves. Then you hear a rumble under your feet from the street along the subway, and you realize that people had to go to work to make that work too. These days we are surrounded by essential and extraordinary people, and they put a blessing in our lives and make our lives possible that I hope has made us permanently grateful for what they do for us, and in a way that will make us treasure that in the future. So if you have any questions, I don't want to break on and on. I would love to take any questions that you have. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. There are a number of questions that came in throughout, but I want to remind everyone to put them in the chat if you think of anything. We're already up to 98 people, so I can't really call on people today like I do occasionally. But one of the first ones that came in was a question on sort of recent history. Are we dramatizing the events since the election, or do you agree that we're in an existential time for democracy and the republic as we know it? Which is, put you on the spot there right off the bat.
Wow, I'll say. Firstly, I want to say, just being someone who ostensibly deals in language, I do find we are overusing that word existential. and I don't say this to any discredit to the questioner. I think that's how we kind of announce we're asking a serious question these days. I always thought that you had to use existential when speaking about philosophy, and the defining issue of philosophy. I think in a way every election is existential in the sense it questions the very basis of democracy and should, and usually we're pretty confident about it being confirmed, even if we disagree with the results. I do think we found something utterly extraordinary this past time, in which you had somebody sitting in the White House occupying the executive powers of the presidency, who was determined to figure out a way that he thought would deliver the election to him despite the result, despite the Constitution, despite the law. It didn't work. And honestly, it didn't come close to working. I think what happened at the Capitol on January 6th, as I said, was disgraceful and shameful, and might have resulted in killing a number of people. There were a number of deaths. That's what some of the people there aspired to. That being said, there was something really very admirable in the fact that members of both parties came back a few hours thereafter and accepted the results of the election. And that was reassuring. There was something really magnificent to that. I think insofar as we should remember not to take democracy for granted, I think maybe what we lived through is valuable, and it should be a good lesson going towards the future, particularly in this information age, as I mentioned, when we're all crawling into our silos. And I think insofar as we no longer take democracy for granted, that'll make us stronger. I hope so.
I think we are.
But yes, it does occur to me today, when there's a coup in Myanmar, which President Biden has understandably denounced. I can understand why the generals in Myanmar say, "Oh yeah," so like, and you have the right to talk about that. This is something we opened up for ourselves.
Yeah, because that was part of the quote this morning. Because there's so much fraud there too. People made the inevitable fraud comparisons. Yeah. Another question that came in: do you try to balance entertainment and news coverage?
Yes, we do, and some weeks are obviously harder than others. And this past, really almost year at this point, has been hardest of all, because there is obviously there's a lot of news in an overwhelming news situation, which is the threat of COVID-19. There is a lot of news in the overwhelming news situation of social justice crisis in America. And then overhanging all of it, of course, it was an election year, and lots of coverage that we had to plan and present there. And I do think, and this is something that I say 2 or 3 times a year at editorial meetings, we could fill our weekly show of 2 hours with absolutely urgent and important stories that everybody should, God damn it, absolutely know. But not many people would listen to a show that strikes just one note that way, which is why we responsibly try and add entertainment, interviews with actors, interviews with musicians, poets, a group like we just had on this last week, 4 guys named Paul O'Sullivan, who have formed the Paul O'Sullivan Singing Group. Stuff that is sometimes just fun. interviewing kids about what they're doing. I think a show that becomes part of people's lives, I think, has to have a relationship with someone. It can't just be, as a rule, about one thing or strike one note. And I sometimes refer to the show we do as kind of a news variety show. We try and put variety into it so that there'll be something that lots of different people will like. And then when we have to say something utterly important and even controversial, I hope we will have a kind of track record with the audience that they will stay with us for that. And I think it's important not to sound preachy and shrill.
Great, thank you. To go back to another heavier question, this person commented on, do you have any thoughts on, to change it up a little bit, why the general population is not as strongly against anti-Semitism recently, in such the same way as the groundswell of support for Black Lives Matter, which I think is a very, very loaded question to put you on the spot there, but.
Yeah, it does put me on the, I don't mind being put on the spot. Look, last year before the pandemic hit, I was on some panel discussion. It was about a civil society, putting more civility into political discourse. And I said, I'll kind of defend myself for saying this. I said, anybody who thinks anti-Semitism is gone in America or doesn't exist should get a look at my email, because not a week goes by I don't get anti-Semitic emails, anti-Semitic tweets, something like that. We also, by the way, happen to be, as a lot of you know, a mixed ethnic, mixed race, mixed religious family. And, we get some very ugly stuff about, forgive me, Jews stealing children and that sort of thing. By the way, from people who often consider themselves to be, politically quite progressive. There's a terrible synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. Has it been a year and a half ago at this particular point? Not even a year and a half ago. I think we just observed the first anniversary. I delivered that little bromide on the stage, and then the moderator said, who happened to be Jewish, said, yes, but he said, I'm sure that's true, but don't deny the obvious. And he said, the obvious is that Jews have found a home in the United States where they can work hard and be recognized and enjoy success and prosperity in a way that they couldn't until even recently in Europe and any other society. And he said, so don't let the bigoted comments of a few blind you to what America has been for Jews. And I had to sit back and go, yeah, I guess so. Certainly there is still anti-Semitism and it's vile, and I sometimes wish more people would be more aware of it. But we put up with a lot, don't we? And as I have, as I've sometimes said to people, that's how the sense of humor developed in many Jewish families and Jewish communities. And I think the acknowledgement of anti-Semitism and the alert and vigilance that we have to have at all times. Another parenthetical. Our daughters were born in China. They're visibly Chinese. They have probably received more bigoted comments because of their last name being Jewish than they have because they're Chinese. Isn't that astonishing? But, I had that growing up, and I'm okay.
Thank you very much. They're all going to be tough questions. People are really, they want the most out of you. I have relatives who are huge fans of Newsmax, OAN, other such services. They view traditional media as fake.
Yeah.
It's very, that once people have an opinion, it's very hard to change it. Do you have any suggestions or any plans?
No, and I mean, I've got to say, those are platforms I'm aware of. I don't spend a lot of time on them. I don't spend any time on them. I don't see them, so I don't, and even more than usual, I don't know what I'm talking about. One of my colleagues who does Weekend Sunday, Lulu Garcia Navarro, she and her husband make a point of watching Fox News and I think a couple of other outlets just to kind of know what's going on there. And my wife and I have never done that, maybe in part because our children would be watching too, and we would just rather not. So I don't know what to say about that. I know this is a real problem within families because you want to love everybody, you want to keep that that sense of familiar love together, and yet it sometimes gets hard. I mean, speaking of anti-Semitism, I mean, there are people on the not Jewish side of our family. How do I say this nicely? Sometimes they're not aware of what they say. Let me put it that way, because I think it's so obvious about Jews and stuff. It doesn't occur to them that they're anti-Semitic. What do you do? I think I am reminded of something Ruth Bader Ginsburg, God rest her soul, said when she was asked, what's the secret to a long-term happy marriage such as you and Marty have had? And she said, well, I do find a certain amount of deafness helps. Sometimes that helps.
That's a great quote. What do you read to keep your mind open?
Oh, well, I read the NPR website. I read the Times. I read the Wall Street Journal. Dabble and more depending on the story, and the CNN website. Twitter has a lot of links that I find some very good, news sources. Some that aren't, quite so good, but I certainly keep up on Chicago news. I can't say. I think the Atlantic is doing a lot of very good work, and it's not all of one ideological flavor. They are often quite challenging. A writer like Caitlin Flanagan. So I enjoy a lot of what's on their website, and that's available. I think that's good. The New Yorker always, National Review. I think particularly during this period, been doing some very valuable things, and that's very good to read. But there's so much to read. You do have to pick and choose, and I just wish people wouldn't pick what they know in advance is going to massage them.
Can you talk about how white people can stretch themselves in crossing racial lines without connecting on a quote token level?
Boy, I think that's something we all have to assess, and I'm no kind of expert on that. I really don't know what to answer. Except to say, have open ears and an open heart, and listen to what Black friends are saying, and to try to understand and react in response to that. I mean, let me point out the obvious. When I was a kid, Jews were not white in this country. No one would ask my father that question. Jews were not white. They'd nearly all been slaughtered during World War II. And now, a few generations later, with some exceptions, they are considered to be among the white hierarchy in this country. All of which is the way to say, I think we're talking about adjustments and goals that are constantly in a state of flux and moving, and by opening our hearts and opening our ears and minds, we are learning more as we go on, and we'll get better. So I can't say there's any acid test. Just sometimes think before you speak, and consider what you've learned most recently.
That's good advice. So when someone asked a question about how undocumented individuals in the U.S. may be particularly reluctant to sign up for vaccines and vaccine appointments, yet obviously they need the vaccine for sort of the herd immunity and all of our health, especially since so many of them are essential workers. Have you heard anything about this?
No, I have not heard anything about it. It's my understanding that this is something the Biden administration wants to change. I hope so.
Me too. Could you please describe how you produce your program, pick topics, speakers, et cetera, sort of that balance of entertainment and news you were mentioning earlier?
Well, we have a wonderful executive producer, Sarah Lucy Oliver, and executive editor, Evie Stone. And the planning is always in a state of flux. We will have our first editorial meeting of the week tomorrow, where we will, bring in ideas. I have relatively few useful ideas, as anyone will tell you, but I make it a point to listen to the good ideas of others, people who are from different backgrounds, people who are from different geographical areas, people who've had different life experiences, people who were younger for sure, and learn something and figure out what they think is interesting. I will bring in a few ideas every now and then, but I have, as you might imagine, I have a kind of limited frame of interest. And, or sometimes I'll have an idea that, I'll just go something like, well, these like elections are like really big story, huh? Something as useful as that. And Sarah and Evie will sit, and some of the process is intuitive in what they think is going to be a good mix. I think we already know what my book interviews of the week are going to be. In fact, hold on, I'll show you, okay? There we go, hold on. So this week I am interviewing Mark Harris, who's done a wonderful biography of Mike Nichols, one of my favorite cultural figures ever. And elsewhere in the apartment, I think my wife is going through it at the moment, is a book called, oh wait, I think I see another copy over here. Sorry. The Good Girls. This is a very important repertorial work. The Mike Nichols book, I think we've had scheduled for a month, and I've known about it really for about a year and knew that we wanted to do it. I think he's a very important cultural figure. This is an important reported piece of widely publicized death of two young women, 14 and 16, in India in, I believe, 2016. And they were found hanging from a tree, and it got a lot of publicity in India. It fit a circumstance and a narrative of young women being raped and then hanging themselves in humiliation because of some of the ways, many of the ways in which women are still shamed and dishonored in village India. And this very good journalist who was born in India, Sonia Falero, who now lives in London, devoted 2 years into looking into the case and found that what actually happened was no less tragic, but wasn't exactly the story that people thought it was. And it's a very important piece of reporting. So we've had those books scheduled for some time. And so as we begin the meeting tomorrow, I know that we will be doing these books, and which I have read, you will notice, and I will draft the interview. And then there's stuff we won't know until we're on the air Saturday morning. Sometimes something happens and we put it on the air Saturday morning just as it happens.
Great, thank you. I'm glad you read all the books. That's always one of my fears, especially the late night hosts that have somebody on, and it just, you never know.
No. Of course, I mean, I should. I always read all the books. I'm an author myself, after all, so I consider it the least we can do.
How do you think these times are influencing your daughters and their peers, the younger generation?
Boy, to say the least, my wife and I have wondered about that, and I think it's probably a mistake to answer that question definitively now. I think in some ways we're not going to discover until years have passed. It's been tougher on one than the other. And as I say that, I don't want to underestimate how tough it's been on the one who seems to be taking it more in stride, because I think that's sometimes another way that youngsters have of coping, right? Not showing it. I think especially when you have daughters from the background that our girls are from, it can rub raw some of your anxieties about permanence in the world. Certainly your anxieties about, the health of people in your family who are all around you. I think it can disconnect you from your friends, in a way, reduce it to Zoom conferences, which I think are no replacement. They're better than nothing, but no replacement for, I think, the byplay in particular that you get in school. I want to note that, and I think there's a real price to be paid for all of that. At the same time, I also think they're probably irreplaceable memories of closeness that we've had as a family. All four of us in this apartment, leaning on each other, relying on each other in ways we hadn't before. I mean, I'm working from home, really going into the office just occasionally for special coverage, and then of course our show on Saturday. And I even haven't done that the past few weeks. I've done everything from my desk over there, table over there, and I got to interview Justin Timberlake the other day and introduce him to my 17-year-old. That's kind of neat. I think she'll remember that. It's kind of neat that when lunchtime comes, I can walk out into the hallway here and say to our daughters, hey, want me to run downstairs for some pizza slices? And then we eat lunch together. I mean, that ordinarily doesn't happen. So I think and I hope they will remember some of that extra closeness too. I mean, our 17-year-old is going to go away to school in the fall. My wife in particular is worried about how I'm going to take that. But in many ways, this has also been, I think, a time where we've realized how more precious to each other we are than ever before. I say that knowing that a few months ago we talked to the writer Michael Lewis and his wife Tabitha Soren, the photographer, and he said that he was at the point of talking about the special closeness too, and it was just great. And then he was looking for something in one of his daughter's bedrooms and noticed that she'd written something like, "Well, day 200 in hell." He said, so maybe our daughters just have a different take on this anyway.
Great. This question is more of a TV question. How do you feel about the warning provided on news programs, particularly the PBS NewsHour, if the video that follows contains some footage that may make someone uncomfortable? Do you think that is being almost too protective and shielding viewers from the world?
We have our equivalent at NPR. I got to tell you, as a journalist, I wasn't wild about that when they first came in, because I thought, yeah, that's our business. Sometimes people will be upset. I guess I'm over that now. If it prepares people and helps them really take a look, then I'm okay with it. Yeah, but I there was a part of me at first that thought that's not really That's not real journalism. And I'm sure with some people, it's, it's got just the opposite effect. Oh, but it's the times in which we're living, and I don't want to be closed-minded about that. I would feel worse if people thought that because of that there were certain things that we couldn't have on the air, and that that I think I don't like. I think we should, with some exceptions, I'm sure, given our sense of taste, we ought to be able to put almost anything that's pertinent to the news and important for people to know on the air.
Great. We have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to skip around a little bit on the questions. I'm trying to ask them all so far, but I'm going to have to skip through a bit here, unfortunately. This is a fun question, I thought. Scott, who have you most enjoyed interviewing?
Well, everybody. It's on my mind today because of the announcement that our dear friend Tony Bennett has Alzheimer's. I think the time that I have spent not just interviewing Tony, but spending time with him. I'm using a lot of props today, aren't I, Jonas? As some of you may know, I was blessed to be able to work on a book with Tony. And so the time that I spent getting to know him, absolutely irreplaceable and just wonderful. And I remember I was so flattered when he first approached me to do the book with him, and we had lunch in New York. And I had, certainly talked to my agent, and my agent said, well, the terms are very nice and it's a great honor, but you've never done a with book before. They've always been your books, and you've got to figure out how you feel about that. So I had lunch again with Tony. And by the way, we were in a famously nice restaurant, and there were lots of people of note there. And if they had gotten a dinner roll stuck in their larynx and couldn't breathe, no one would do anything about it if Tony just said, hey, a little more iced tea over here. I mean, Tony Bennett just stopped the place cold, as you can imagine. So I told him the conversation my agent and I had had. And Tony Bennett said to me, hey, kid, I understand what you're talking about. I never took second billing. Only time I ever took second billing was with Frank Sinatra and Duke Ellington. And I said to myself, well, okay. If you took second billing with, Frank Sinatra and Duke Ellington, then I'll take second billing with you too. So today in particular, Tony's at the top of my list.
Great. That sounds fascinating. So to follow up directly with that, someone asked about, they say they love reading some of your books. Do you have anything in the works? Perhaps something funny?
I've been working on a novel set on a baseball team, a fictitious baseball team called the Chicago Otters. And I hope parts of it are funny. So I'm working on it now. I've also, and this is maybe something people in our neighborhood should know, I finished drafting a book. We'll see where it goes with illustration and everything. We'll see. I'm not sure everybody knows this, but our family has a zebra that lives on our balcony named Stripey, who we met on the metro. And because on our building, the tines on the balcony, run up and down like that. So Stripey kind of blends in. And Mrs. Blanchard, who lives across the way, has called up the building manager and said, the Simons have a zebra on their balcony. I'm convinced of it. And of course, the building manager comes up and said, do you have a zebra on your balcony? And of course, I don't want to say we do, and I don't want to say we don't. So I say, well, why don't you take a look for yourself? And Stripey holds very still, doesn't shake. And the building manager goes, okay, I don't see a zebra, but something funny is going on here. So in any event, it's a story revealing to the world that we have a zebra who lives on our balcony. But that's serious, Jonas.
Deeply, deeply serious. From all my days in the zoo, it's always the zebras are the ones you got to watch out for.
I've been told that, as a matter of fact. Well, not Stripey. Stripey is, I'll put it this way. Stripey is the kindest, most wonderful creature on earth. But if you get between Stripey and his cheesecake, Stripey loves cheesecake, okay? Just let him have his cheesecake.
I love that. That sounds like a tremendously fun book.
Yeah.
I've got a few more questions here I'll try to squeeze in. This is one more serious question. Do you think recent events in DC have had an impact, either positive or negative, on DC's quest to gain statehood?
I think they've renewed the question in a way that is very valuable. Let's put it this way, because as we had Kojo Namdi from WAMU on our show a couple of weeks ago, and he pointed out that Mayor Bowser, had the District of Columbia been a state, would have been able to call in the National Guard on her own, not have to worry about the federal government. I think it'll renew the call. I don't know as the political prospectus has changed, because you would need 2/3 of the state to accept DC as a state, and traditionally these things have been done in the past where you have to admit two at the same time. And I don't know if I don't know if there's, to be blunt about it, I don't know if there's enough Republican votes for DC statehood. I mean, I have reminded my wife of the argument Jack Kemp, I guess whom we would now consider kind of an old school Republican, used to make for DC statehood. And he used to say that if the Congress wouldn't give statehood to the District of Columbia, he thought what they should do is that they should declare DC a no tax zone, where DC residents and businesses would not pay federal income tax. And then he said, you boy, would that change the equation? And he said, one way or another, it could only be good for DC, that either they would become a state, or that businesses would be moving here from all over the country and people would be moving here from all over the country because there'd be no income tax.
Another question I think is a great one. How do you raise girls to be empowered, successful, and kind in today's world?
Oh, tell them they can be anything they want, and they can. Love them, be there for them, encourage them in things that interest them, even when they're very different from what you're interested in. And I think that's true of both of our daughters, who are not particularly interested in anything I do for a living, although they're very nice about it. And I think that's great. One of our daughters, I think, wants to be the Theo Epstein of horses. They both love horses, and she thinks there's a lot of good work to be done, and thinks a lot of people have missed a lot of things in how horses can be trained. I guarantee you that has nothing to do with any experience that I've ever shared with her. As I've often joked, I think my distant relatives in both Ireland and then Spain, the Jewish side of my family, may have been horse thieves, but certainly were not, equestrians. Just, open up the world for them. Open up the world for them and let them know that you're part of their lives, wherever they go, wherever they wind up, and give them that solid backing. Both of our daughters are pretty self-confident, I must say. They don't lack for confidence, and I think that's great. Some of you may know, because I posted it on Twitter. I mean, they're both very funny when they sometimes impersonate boys. Our oldest daughter goes to an all-girls high school, and our youngest is in her 8th grade year at a co-ed school. And she was imitating one of the boys in her class a few weeks ago at the dinner table. And I laughed so hard, I broke the chair in which I was sitting. I absolutely, we refer to it now in our family as Danish modern carnage. That's how much they can both make me laugh. It's absolutely astonishing how funny they are. And I think both of them who have developed that kind of sense of humor will be able to navigate through life.
Great. Maybe you have time for one or two more, but I liked this question, so I'll make sure to ask this. What's your sense of the future of radio? Will there be enough people with the attention span to listen, especially to sort of more thoughtful, measured content?
I hope so. I guess we're about to find out. You know, a lot of radio is now audio, and it's on demand as it is with video. I still think, you know, we're living through a period where there is a lot to be said for the live, as it happens, news experience of what broadcasting can deliver. And I think that's true. I also think that for a show like ours, there's a lot to be said for that weekly experience of being together and kind of a commonality in an audience. So yes, I think there is. You know, will there be other platforms that might take a certain section of the audience? Yes, I guess so. But you know, we will eventually be, term I hate, but here you go, players on those platforms too.
Great. I'm going to finish with two quick questions and throw it back to Denise to finalize, to finish up. Just want to say thank you very much. I've certainly learned a lot and thoroughly enjoyed talking with you today. But two quick questions. Do you have any pets? And someone said they loved your Facebook Live sessions. Will those continue?
Yes, we actually do them on Twitter, Periscope and Twitter. And yes, even, yeah, one way or another, we began it during the pandemic. And like tonight, we're going to have Robert Capello, the author, on talking about what's his book called Listening for America, 9 greatest popular songs in American history. Tomorrow night, I think we have Judy Bjorst, tomorrow night? No, we have Stephen Paul Kendrick, a father and son who've written a great book about when John F. Kennedy called a jailer in Georgia to try and persuade him to get Martin Luther King out of prison. And then Wednesday we have Judy Bjorst. Yes, those will continue. I'm trying to remember, what was the first question?
Do you have any pets?
Oh my God, how could I forget that? Do we have a pet? Yes, we have a wonderful dog, a French poodle named Daisy. Because she's French, of course, her name is Daisy Richard Simone. My wife is French, as some of you may know. So, you know, my wife's family name, and then Simone, we franglize it a little bit there. And she's a wonderful poodle. Some of you may run into her in the neighborhood. She's so friendly. My God, absolutely so friendly. Meets people on the street. She just, you know, and I should explain, Jonas, I am Daisy's interpreter. So I speak in her behalf. So for example, when we're out on the street and Daisy's so excited at meeting somebody, I know she's saying, hey, I am cute, huh? You cannot resist me, huh? The pet right here, huh? The pet right here. I find that, I don't know why people think it's me. I am simply, you know, conveying what Daisy has said. You know, it's not me at all. It's what Daisy says. So she's wonderful. She's a French poodle. She's actually from New York. Met her on the street in Chelsea. In fact, on the week that I was appearing with Tony Bennett for appearances with this book, and so we connect Tony Bennett and Daisy Richard Simone in the same breath. I've just been emailing a lot, as you can imagine, with various members of the family today, and they all ask how Daisy is. Daisy's a great little dog. And did I call her a dog? She's a great little member of our family. What can I say? She's a great little member of our family and a huge presence, not little at all. And I think we've importantly, our time during this pandemic has been a lot more fun and enjoyable because Daisy is a part of our family.
Scott, I want to just take a moment to say a hearty thank you to you. I also want to acknowledge the important role of any dog owner in channeling their dog's thoughts and feelings.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise. Thank you.
Essential.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, every now and then, because she's French, she looks off in the distance. Now, Jonas, Daisy can use the word existential because she's French, and she reads Le Monde in the morning online, so Daisy looks off in the distance and says things like, oh, alors, English, it lacks panache, huh? I mean, she says things like that. And she has that kind of French attitude of, what is life anyway? Yeah, she's an existentialist poodle. But I think she answers that question, by saying, what is life? It's, come on, give me a pet. Let's snuggle. Let's have fun. Oh, and she loves yogurt. Oh, does she love yogurt? Gosh.
It's absolutely true that dogs always put in place what's the most important things in life.
Yeah, they really do.
Well, Scott, I really want to thank you on behalf of our 100+ participants this afternoon. It's always a pleasure to listen to your thoughts and your ideas, and you've been very gracious in sharing those with us today. So I really want to thank you on behalf of all of our participants here, and wish you the very best as you prepare to send your daughter off to college.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. It's an involuntary, shrill whine. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Take care.
All right.
Thanks
Thanks,
to all
Denise.
of our
Thank you, Jonas.
participants.